I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We lived in upstate New York for about 5 years, but then my parents came back to Philadelphia. I went to school, elementary school there, attended Friends Select School in Philadelphia. Lived there until I went off to college, and since then have been everywhere else. Got a PhD in economics. I now have to confess that it was at Harvard, though I have not given them a penny for at least the last 20 years, certainly not since Larry Summers was hired as president. I didn't particularly like Larry Summers as an economist, but when somebody gets fired for stating a perfectly reasonable empirical speculation, you know there's something seriously wrong there. And I spent 10 years teaching. First of all at Caltech, then came to Washington to do a couple of different things. Taught for a semester or two at Stanford, and then I spent a couple of years doing research at Resources for the Future as well. So I lump all that together into a decade or so of research and teaching. In between, I came back from California to Washington. This was right after Watergate. It was during the just after the Arab oil embargo, during the period of price controls on gasoline lines, flailing about on energy policy. Talk about deja vu. And I just discovered that I had a much greater time applying economic principles to real world problems and actually seeing that that the insights that I could provide were actually had a place in the policymaking process. I can't say they were always used, but back then in the 1970s and early 80s, you really had a sense that both in the executive branch and in Congress, they were trying to understand what was going on. Congressional testimony was really for the purpose of forcing members of Congress to sit down for an hour or two and concentrate on one subject so that by putting together a panel of witnesses, their staff could actually get them to hear something that they needed to hear to learn. That era was completely gone by the time pretty much by the time I left government, but certainly by now. Yeah. But that was what I enjoyed. That was why it was exciting to come to Washington. And I spent my time, first I was at the Congressional Budget Office when it first was opened. Then I moved to the Department of Energy when it was founded. Stayed there for most of the 1980s. Then my last position in government was as Assistant Director of the Congressional Budget Office. That probably is the most fun job to have in Washington because I was more or less independent. I was in charge of doing studies of all of the programs in the U.S. in the budget except for defense and health and human services, education and welfare programs. So we did a lot of interesting things there, and I enjoyed that. But by the end of that time, I was already seeing that Congress was interested in theater and sound bites to use to support the positions they'd already reached with little or no attention to actual thinking through what the consequences of various policies might be. Yes, I spent I still am doing some consulting, but yeah, for about over 30 years I was in private practice doing consulting. Please, I never really wanted to be a Washingtonian. I just couldn't figure out how to get away from there and do the things that I was good at doing and could earn a living doing. So now Esther and I first came to the Eastern Shore back in the mid-90s. We've owned a place here ever since then. And for the past, I guess, close to 10 years now, we've been full-time residents. So it was always intended to be an escape from Washington. At first, it was an escape on weekends and as much time as we could get away. At that point, I was excited about sailing and getting out on the water. I dragged my wife out on the sailboat every weekend, sometimes every day over the weekend. That's why she was so excited when, after a few years, I took up skeet shooting, and she could say, David, why don't you go to the range today? We don't really need to go out on the boat, do we? So, and that way I got to know a whole lot of people here who I really liked and I enjoyed being with, and I felt were much more congenial to my tastes and interests than the people that I was happily leaving behind in Washington. We did. It was frustrating, kind of living weekdays in one place, weekends in another, because it was very hard to get connected either one. And that was one of the reasons that we decided let's get ourselves settled here and do it as soon as we can. And so I became involved at St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church. You recruited me to start writing a column for the Talbot Spy right away. At that time, I was still working pretty much full time. And so but I had decided long before I finished consulting, maybe sometime, around 15 years ago, that I really wanted to have time to step back and reflect about what had gone wrong with policymaking in Washington, and to develop a perspective of my own on how to think about economic, social, policy issues. I was recruited almost immediately to join the Republican Council, which was a Republican political action committee. It'd been around for a long time. The people who at that point were board members were friends that I had made at Talbot Rod and Gun Club, neighbors where we were living at that point on Broad Creek, and friends who actually got to know me through the Talbot Spy. Called up and said, "Hey, are you the one who's writing that? Maybe we should get together." It was a great introduction to the community. All of those things led to my getting more closely connected both with politics in the county and getting to know other people and getting involved in other activities that way. After I stopped writing for the Talbot Spy, two friends said, "Let's start a journal of our own." And it was prompted largely by the observation, even back then, and this was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago? Maybe you have a better chronological sense than I do, that the notion of canceling speakers, writers, because they were saying something that was that hurt somebody's feelings, taking platforms away as a method of maintaining political influence, were all happening. And we realized, one of the ways to be sure of not being canceled is if we own and operate the whole thing ourselves. And so that's what we've done. That's been the Chesapeake Observer. I keep telling people now, if you want to know something about what I think, look at www.chesob.org, and you will find me expressing myself about just about everything. Or you could go back to the archives of the Talbot Spy and look up David Montgomery and find some other outrageous things I've said. I guess the simple answer, the proximate cause, was that people encouraged me to run. The more, the things that made me willing to do it was this notion of people being canceled, being ostracized, being shunned by their neighbors, by their peers, when they expressed views that were different from what is currently a kind of a socially acceptable set of opinions. And that's at that point I began to realize what a very special place we have here on the Eastern Shore, in Talbot County in particular. I mean, the water views are great. The access to the Chesapeake Bay, the access to hunting, fishing, outdoor activities is marvelous. It's attracting, God help us, people from all over the East Coast to want to big cities to want to move here. And that's another issue we could talk about. But it was, to me, more that we really did have a community here. If you look at the 500 charitable organizations that exist here, the way that everyone from the wealthiest to all the rest of the members of the congregation join together to do things to help each other out, and that it's a community that's small enough that there's a good chance you're going to meet just about anybody, just about everybody in the grocery store or Albright's or the Walmart or something like that. We were always shocked at how many people we knew that we would bump into at Walmart, even when we first come here. You would think that that would have led to a level of civility here. And I was disabused of that when I started reading some of the things that people had to say, not just about me in the Talbot Spy, but the comments that said, all of you people who voted for Trump are morally evil and reprehensible. Well, there's better than 50-50 chance that anybody you encounter on the street outside of Chestertown is going to have done that. Don't you realize this is a community where we ought to be able to get together? I think the thing that made me finally willing to do this is a sense that that's a community that needs to be protected. We need to protect it. It needs to be protected now against all sorts of threats that are coming from the outside if we're going to preserve the kind of Talbot County that made us want to live here through all of that time. I think I am by far the best qualified budget analyst, someone who understands tax policy backwards and forwards, who understands how government can affect the economy and the direction that any place goes, that I am capable of digging into the numbers, and I think that's really important now. I think my friend Kyle O'Donnell, who's running, is also really good at that, but I think one of the problems we're facing now is that we have immense pressures from outside to force us to spend money on things. The mandates for school funding that are coming along will kill the county with the size of the increases in per capita expenditures on schools that they're going to require. And in order to deal with that, we need to be able, and school budgets have always been something that is kept as incomprehensible as possible. Let out as little information as possible about what's going in there. Take advantage of the level of effort requirement. Once you start doing something, you can't cut it back. It's not going to be easy to look through that and force an accounting, because that's the only control the county school board has, the county council has to influence anything in the schools, is that the county council does get to decide on what the budget's going to be within those limits. I think that there's always a great deal of discussion about creating jobs, economic growth, what we should be bringing into the county. I have a lot of experience and a lot of analytically sound skepticism about most of those claims, and I'm happy to put that at the disposal of the county, whether I'm in office or not. But in office, it makes it a bit easier to push back directly against things that are not a good idea, or to figure out what are the things that can keep the county whole as it is now and protect it from economic dangers that it might face. The four priorities: police, school curriculum, managing growth, and then, of course, taxes and the budget. And those are linked because we can't keep taxes low unless we can figure out how to control expenditures. I don't have any magic answers right now about budget and taxation. It does kind of get into this notion of managing growth, though, which is that we're facing a prospect now of growth that would make it hard for Talbot County to remain the kind of good place that it's been in the past. I don't like the lakeside development. I didn't like the lakeside development 20 years ago when I first heard about it, and right now I don't think that's the kind of growth that the county should have. So I would like to see us take the comprehensive plan seriously, that the county should stick by the comprehensive plan once they have it, that we should be, and in the case of Lakeside, we need to find a way to avoid adding that many houses to the county very quickly. And there are two reasons for it. One of them is I think that the people that bringing that many new people into the county would change the character of the county completely. I also think it would cost us more money than we're ever going to get out of the taxes. They don't have a police force. The police force in Trapp would have to be expanded tremendously. Infrastructure for roads, schools for the kids that are going to be living there. These are things that need to be dug into, but the conventional wisdom is that you never get as much tax revenue out of development as you have to spend for the new infrastructure and schools and everything else that's required. And so we need to take that into account. Maybe a tool that we could use is trying to figure out some way to get the developer to make up that difference before they are allowed to build. And then now there are all the other issues about not having a workable solution for water treatment for anything that's built there. The issues about how the county council ignored the comprehensive plan. They're all things I take seriously. So I may not agree with all of my other Republican candidates in my thinking about that, but I think that managing growth so that we can maintain a community and not overstretch and not kind of find ourselves digging ourselves deeper and deeper into a budgetary hole is really important. Police is simple. We need to support proactive policing. Probably the most important thing the county is going to do, the county council is going to do, is appoint the members of the Public Accountability Board and the board underneath that, which actually investigates and decides on punishments for all police discipline. I think that this is a safe county. Our police are proactive. They go out and they make traffic stops. They keep an eye on people. They intercept the drugs. They intercept the guns. And I want to make sure we can keep it that way. And the only way we can keep it that way is we have a county council that appoints sensible people to those commissions. And so, that may be another major motivation for me that kind of pushed me over the edge, because I already had arranged to testify in Annapolis against these bills 2 years ago. Well, not in Annapolis, testify remotely when they were trying to sneak through some hearings without having anybody there. And so I firmly support the police. Absolutely appalled at what has happened in our big cities, and unhappy that so many people are trying to flee those cities to places like Talbot County. Now, I think it would be great if everyone who lived in Washington, New York, Chicago could find a place like Talbot County to live. But they can't all come here, and we can't figure out, we can't try to fit all of them into here. So that's my concern. That's one of my concerns about growth. On schools, there's the issue of spending. I mean, that's a big one. How it is that Annapolis continues to think that by throwing money at schools and hiring more administrators, they're going to solve any problem, since, like original sin, one of the few things that's empirically proven is that spending more money on schools does not improve their performance. But we also have had everything that's been going on under the rubric of critical race theory. Now, I was writing about critical race theory 2 years ago in the Chesapeake Observer. It's something I understood because the philosophical backgrounds on that were the things that I studied when I was in college. because it was coming out of the 60s that the radicals went into the law schools and the humanities departments and started pushing the notions that are behind that. And within 3 months after I had written that, it was the words CRT were being bandied about everywhere. And I am very concerned about what the schools teach in the curriculum. Critical race theory is now a term that's probably not so helpful anymore because people spend too much time arguing about whether what's being taught really is CRT or really isn't. And what I am opposed to is indoctrination of children with a particular political point of view at the expense of time that they should be being taught normal math, science, history, and the distorted history that is being fed to students now by those who are motivated by critical race theory. So that's a brief one on my position on that. Police, schools, I think I covered those, growth, and all of them are, in terms of this, can we keep the county for the rest of my lifetime the kind of place that it has been through most of the time I've been here? I feel that this is a race in which I have nothing to gain and nothing to lose. I'm not going to become a career politician. I'm not running for this because I am going to get a great deal of personal satisfaction out of sitting there making all of the decisions and the work that goes into the county council. I don't see it as a step up to anything. I don't need it to promote my business. And on the other side of that, I have nothing to be afraid of. Nobody can threaten my livelihood. Nobody can say they're not going to go to work at my store already. The people who don't like me are turning their backs on me, so I'm ready for that. So I want to do this very much, but it's really out of a sense of duty, and that this is a way that I can give something back for, again, the marvelous benefits that I've gotten out of being an American citizen for the last 77 years.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.